The cafe, clean and simple and accented with potted plants of vivid green, is filled with pleasant chatter and a lingering aroma of fresh coffee. It isn't as busy as a more popular chain establishment, but it's by no means empty, laughing students and chatting employees and a mother whose toddler stares at everyone in sight. In one corner of the room, however, no patron sits but one. Yet even so, this corner feels more crowded than any other part of the cafe. The gentleman here, clad in a double-breasted suit of starkest black, one long leg crossed over the other, appraises the delicate art of Thomas' latte, and as he raises it to his lips, the design dissolves into nothing. The man called Time sets down the porcelain cup and raises his wrist to check a faceless watch. He stares at the turning cogs with sharp gray eyes before humming and standing from his seat, grabbing the overcoat draped over his back. The late morning light that leaks in from the wall of windows behind him bathes his golden brown skin in ethereal light, silver hair peppered with streaks of ages past, shining like a halo. The room hushes as he walks through, and he pays it no mind. The mother watches him warily, and her child doesn't notice him at all. So that was an excerpt from the very beginning of our project called Taking Vlogs. Our original concept idea was to write a short story. Don't do that. Was to write a short story, which is 2,500 to 7,000 words. And then after planning, we thought, okay, novella, but we didn't quite make it there. Stop. So we ended up with we ended up with 16,316 words, which is a novelette. So close enough.
So the first thing we did was kind of plot it out. We just threw some ideas around. It's the first time that we had really worked with another writer on projects, so that took a bit of adjusting. But first we had to come up together with an idea we both liked and could really grow. First we had to figure out all the plot points we wanted to hit, the style, the tones, and that part was difficult. But once we had that, everything got a bit easier. We divided up the scenes and highlighted them in different colors on the plot list. And a lot of the scenes we both wanted to write, so we would either try to really write it together or both write it and take the best parts. And then after a while, we started just going off topic and just talking about favorite pop culture references, all this and that. But that's definitely a necessary part of the process, because if you sit there and grind and focus so hard, for hours and hours, you're gonna have nothing good.
After that, once we had a good fleshed out skeleton, we spent hours just writing and editing each other's works. It was kind of difficult because neither of us had ever co-written anything, so it's kind of weird to have to work with another person. So we ended up with a nice system where JC and I would both write all of our parts for the entire act. Joseph would edit as we went along, and then after writing, we would go through each other's works and make notes. Then JC would mark his favorite parts of mine, and then I would take the parts that he highlighted for both his and mine, and then weave them all together. And then Joseph would take another look through to make sure there were no mistakes. We finished that for the first act around 7 p.m. and then we took a break, and that turned into bedtime, and then we reconvened the next day.
Okay. So we basically repeated the same structure for the next two acts. Act 2 was the longest, I guess. It was one of the most parts that has the most character development and most of the problem setting. So that's what gave most of the focus to. And that lasted around 3 a.m. before we finally finished.
And then we stuck them all together, and then we cried because it was finally over and we could rest. And then we had a bunch of post-it notes on my door where we had just written down possible titles as we were going along, and then we just picked our favorite out of all of them. And then I printed the manuscript this morning, and here it is. That's it.
What are the pros and cons of working with other writers?
I would say that the cons are that sometimes you both have very different images of how something should go. I feel like JC and I both had a different idea of how Time himself as a character would talk. I was a little more serious and somber with it, but he added a lot more wit to it. But then the pro to that is that you get a new perspective on a lot of things. So you go like, oh, well, maybe that is a pretty good idea. That adds some flavor to stuff. So.
And one of the biggest problems I have with writing in general is almost trying to be too perfect. You get the characters, exactly how you want them, even though you really don't know how you want them. So this process definitely combated that, where, because we had to merge our ideas and kind of negotiate, it kind of changed, the fact that we pointed out the fact we didn't know what we wanted, and just to trust the process and try to get the best product we can. And it helps a lot too, co-writing, because you don't have to get quite as many, hours at the keyboard. So that was definitely nice.
We also have like some drawings that Joseph did of different scenes that were really fun. So these can be little teasers for if anyone wants to read it.
Where do we get a copy of it?
It is in the folder and the digital version, and then I can also put a link into Slack for anyone who wants to take a look.
Could you give us like a back cover of the book, what the little blurb would be?
Yeah. So time is like the personified version of this concept that the entire universe is built on. And he is very jaded by this. But then he meets someone who is pretty much the exact opposite of jaded. And she is nothing that he would expect from any human because of how she treats the concept of life itself. And because of how mindful she is of every single moment and how she just sort of sits in the flow of time and lets it happen. And so he just tries to delve a little more into that.
Any other questions?
So writing as a group is something very common in the TV world, right, or in the film industry. Did you guys feel like this is a direction you want to go in after doing this work?
Well, I feel like in that case, short, because that does work really well with TV shows and the like, but because if you're doing a fictional story rather than a script, because there's so much narrative put into it and wordsmithing in general. If you're only writing dialogue, it's not too hard to brainstorm just by talking to each other because that's what you're going to be ending up with in the end. But in this case, because there were so many other elements, it wasn't quite the same. But it did give kind of a peek into what that would be like. So yeah.
And also, as I was editing, I noticed the two different styles kind of going along with each other. Angie's more focused on kind of detailing the scenery and giving emotion to characters, while JC is very blunt in what he wants to write. And so that makes it very contrasting and very actiony, while Angie gave more flow to it. So how they coexist together was kind of interesting.
Is there other illustrations that you did other than these ones? Did you do a cover? Did you do illustrations?
I didn't do a
different parts of
cover.
the book?
I think I had one more, but it's not here. But these were pretty much